Hello everyone, David Ronafalk here from Mayako. Today I will share a great tip for you guys to work around having to use all the small little shims and stuff in between the bearings of the front axle when you build the CVD. So let's get right into it. So here in front of me I have the knuckle and the CVD axle and all the parts that we need for this build. And I just wanted to cover real quick what these are basically the shims that are supposed to be used when you're assembling this. And they are used because there's an oval hole here in the axle. And this oval hole is basically there to be able to kind of minimize the amount of play you have in the bearings and in the knuckle. So that's the reason why this oval hole was made, just to be able to, as everything get used, you can still shim it together so that there's minimum amount of play. And I think it's a good idea, but for me, I just find this a little bit too much into the details, and it takes a bit of time when you're building this and when you're at the track thrashing. Maybe you want to change your CVDs or whatever. It can be very frustrating having to deal with all these little shims. So I have found a solution for that. So that's what I was going to show you today. But before we do that, I just wanted to kind of explain the theory behind where you're going to use these shims here. So basically these little shims here, they go onto the axle, of course. So basically you mount the back bearing here, the big one. You have this axle. You push that one through, then you have this red crush tube spacer that goes in between the bearings, and this is where these little small shims are going to be used. So if you put this bearing on here now and you mount the hex pin and you tighten the pin and you feel that this isn't spinning smooth, it's like a little bit gritty, that's where these little small shims come in the picture. So basically you have to remove the hex and the outer bearing again, so you basically have this view right here. So you have the back bearing inside, the crush tube spacer, and now you mount either one or two of these little small one here before you put the bearing on. So basically when it's gritty, the crush tube spacer isn't really wide enough in between the bearings, so it's basically pushing on the inner ring here of the bearing when you tighten the hex, and that's why it gets a little bit gritty. You have different bearings, different tolerances. Some use the Mayako stuck bearings, some use some other bearings. They're all going to have a bit different tolerance, so you're going to have to play with these little shims here to get everything right. So that's for the small shims. The big shims are basically for when you've assembled this, you have mounted the hex and you tighten the pin down and you have a bit of play in this way. That's where the big shim comes into the picture. So then again, you have to remove the hex, you have to remove the outer bearing. So now you're going to drop that big spacer in before the outer bearing goes in there. So basically you put it like that, and this will actually shim the bearing out a little bit in the knuckle, and that will remove this little play you have in this way. So basically that's where these shims are supposed to be used, and now we've covered that. So let's take a look into what my tip is for you to be able to avoid having to use these shims. So basically you have to do this before you assemble the front CVD. So you just need to have the axle like this. For this you want to use a bit of green Loctite. So I'm just going to put a bit of Loctite on my setup board there. And then you have these M5 set screws. Same one that you use for the outside where you tighten the pin down. But you're going to have to get another piece for this part. Because what we're going to do is we're going to mount one set screw from the back here. So this inside here is threaded all the way past this oval hole. So now we can use a set screw mounting it from the back side. And that's why you want to use the green Loctite as well, because you don't want this one to come loose. So basically we just go ahead and we mount that just one or two threads deep for now. Basically so you can see that there's enough space for the pin to go through the hole. And once we've done that, we mount the axle through the knuckle. We put the crush tube spacer in there still, and then the bearing on the outside. So now we mount the hex and the hex pin as well. And next step is to put the other set screw here from the outside. And I also use green Loctite on that because I found this little thing can get loose, and you're gonna lose the pin if you change the wheels or tires or something like that. So now I've just tightened it down a little bit, and I can feel that it's not bad, but this is where you're gonna have to play a bit of the position of the inside set screw here. And that's why you don't wanna build a CVD before, so you can reach the set screw from the back. So it's still a little bit gritty. So then you have to loosen the outside one a little bit, and then you tighten the back one, and again then you can tighten the outside one. So now I feel it's fully free There's no more grit to it, and there's just a slight bit of play here. This way I like to have just a little bit of play so it's not sticky and it spins smooth. So basically that screw, it kind of works so that the hole here in the axle would be a round hole instead of an oval hole. So basically this back set screw here works as a stop for the pin, so it's not crushing the bearings. You know, this is a quick workaround having to use these shims. So now I haven't shimmed it at all. It's perfectly smooth, and there's just a tiny bit of play in this way, so everything, you know, spins free. So once you have found the right location of the back set screw, you might have to kind of play a little bit if it's your first time doing this. Then you'll learn quickly, and you can apply that to the other side of the car as well. So now once we've done this step, of course we don't want to touch the inner set screw anymore, but of course we also have to build our CVD here. So now again I remove the pin, the hex, and I push the axle out. So now you can leave the bearings inside. Of course we leave the set screw, like I said, here in the back in its place. And for the CVD build I use the XTR copper grease. I've used this for quite a long time now. So I just take the drive shaft and I kind of just apply a bit of grease on the end here. I push the little CVD tube inside, and then I just go and work around with a drive shaft in the axle like this. So you don't have to use a lot, because then dirt will obviously get stuck in there. So I just use a tiny bit to kind of lube everything. This copper grease has been working well for me. Usually I just take my finger and I wipe the excess amount of grease off. And now we have the CVD built, and we can go ahead and install the CVD into the knuckle again. Now we can add the hex and the hex pin. And last we're just gonna tighten the set screw here on the outside. Tighten it down like that. Like I said, I use green Loctite for both screws, and now everything is spinning smooth. You have a bit of play, and you didn't have to use any shims at all. So that was a pretty good tip. I'm sure everyone is going to like that one, not having to use the shims. Hopefully in the near future we're also going to have axles with round holes instead of the oval ones. So we're not going to have to add like a set screw from the back then. So then everything should be good from, you know, from the start, and not having to play with any shims at all. Anyway, I just wanted to share this little tip because I think it's going to save, like I said, a lot of time for many of you building the front knuckles, and the frustration that can come out not having them, you know, spin free. Hopefully you like that one, and we'll be back with another video next week. Thank you.